I still remember my first day of high school like it was yesterday. Middle school had been fine, Samantha and I had been friendly, even close, but everything changed the moment freshman year started. I was 17, shy, anxious, and silently battling anorexia. Back then, I had no defense mechanism, no courage to speak up, and Samantha, well, she didn't hesitate to exploit that. It started subtly at first. A quiet sneer here, a remark that seemed small but burned like acid inside. "Did you shower today?" she whispered once, just loud enough for me to hear. "I can smell you from here." My stomach would twist into knots, my heart sinking as though it had dropped into a pit. I tried to ignore it, but every day she discovered a new way to humiliate me, and it always felt personal. Then came the lies. They were cruel, precise, and carefully designed to ruin me. Samantha told people I did disgusting things at school, things that weren't just rumors. They were attacks on my character. I remember walking down the hall, hearing whispers and feeling eyes boring into me. I was the shy, fragile kid everyone pitied or avoided. Friends, not a single one could stand up for me, and even if they could, I didn't have the strength to accept their help. For a whole year, it was a storm I couldn't escape. I developed routines just to survive, checking my reflection obsessively, constantly adjusting my clothes, making sure nothing about me would give her or anyone else a reason to mock me. My school days felt like a slow, endless march through anxiety, humiliation, and fear. I hated Samantha. I hated how powerless I felt. Worst of all, I blamed myself for her cruelty. By the time that year ended, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and had no closure. Samantha moved on. She didn't even notice me anymore, and the rumors slowly faded from everyone else's memory. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. That anger simmered in me for years, a quiet, heavy weight that no one could see. Fast forward almost 4 years. I'm healthier now, mentally, physically, emotionally. Therapy taught me my worth. Friends reminded me that their opinion mattered more than hers, and that simmering anger transformed into something sharper, calmer, ready to be used wisely. And then, one day, the perfect opportunity appeared. It was during a dance class. The same teacher who oversaw Samantha's dance career was there. The kind who notices everything, who never misses a detail. I also knew that the girl I was speaking to took lessons alongside Samantha's younger sisters. Coincidence? Absolutely not. I overheard Samantha and her friend talking. They were loud, careless, oblivious to the fact that someone else was listening. They were saying how ugly her younger sisters were. It stung, even though it wasn't about me. But it wasn't just gossip, it was information. I tucked it away in my mind, building a mental map of what I could use if the moment ever arrived. Then it did. I told my story, not a single lie, only truths carefully framed, with added details that would sting. How Samantha constantly criticized her sister's appearances in class, and how her new boyfriend had almost faced serious consequences for harassment. The room shifted immediately. You could feel it. My teacher, standing nearby, whispered under his breath, "What?" His shock was almost visible in the way he froze, stunned. And for the rest of the class, he couldn't shake it. Seeing Samantha gasp, seeing the flicker of panic in her eyes as she whispered to her friend, feeling that subtle shake in her voice, it was intoxicating. I felt a cold satisfaction settle deep in my chest, a quiet triumph I had craved for years. For once, the shy, powerless kid from freshman year had the upper hand. But here's the key. I didn't need to go further. I didn't need to create chaos, spread rumors, or manipulate others. I simply planted the seeds of truth, and that alone was enough. That's the power of truth when it lands on someone who thought they could twist reality. They crumble, and all you have to do is step back. After class, I walked out with my head held high. That anger I had carried for years? Lighter. Gone. I realized something important. Revenge isn't about hurting someone more than they hurt you. It's about reclaiming your peace. I didn't need Samantha to apologize, cry, or even acknowledge me. I needed to know that I had power over my own story, and I did. Over the years, I tried everything to release that anger. Rage rooms, therapy, journaling, meditation, but nothing gave me closure like this moment. Quiet, controlled, perfectly timed, and entirely justified. It wasn't about drama. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about being seen, being understood, and finally having my voice heard in a world that ignored it for far too long. Walking out of that dance class, I felt light-free. The timid, powerless freshman I had been seemed like a stranger. I had survived. I had grown. I had reclaimed my story. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was defined by Samantha's cruelty. I felt like me. And that is where this chapter of my story ends. The seeds have been planted. Truth has been told. I don't need to chase further revenge. Life has a way of balancing itself, and I've done my part. The rest is up to fate, to time, to college, to whatever comes next. For now, I am free, whole, and finally at peace. The next few days at school were strange. It was subtle, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention, but I noticed it immediately. Samantha, the girl who had spent a full year tearing me apart, suddenly seemed smaller. She walked down the hall with a careful, measured pace, glancing around as if expecting someone to point out her secrets at any moment. And maybe in a way they were. I tried to act normal. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, not in a way that would make it obvious I'd done anything. But inside, I felt a strange, quiet satisfaction every time I caught her eye. I knew she was thinking, calculating, wondering if anyone else had heard what I said in dance class. She tried to act unaffected, but her nervous gestures betrayed her. A hand brushing her hair too many times, a slight tremor in her voice when she spoke, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. People started whispering. Not loudly, not aggressively, but enough that I could feel it ripple through the hallways. Students who barely noticed Samantha before were now looking at her differently. Questions floated through the air, subtle curiosity mixed with judgment. And all the while, I remained quiet, letting the truth speak for itself. I had learned long ago that power doesn't come from yelling or spreading rumors. It comes from control. I caught myself thinking about the irony of it all. For years, I had felt powerless, invisible, trapped under Samantha's shadow. And now, by simply speaking the truth, I had shifted the balance. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was justice, quiet and precise. And every day, as I moved through the school, I felt that weight lifting from my chest a little more. One afternoon, during a lunch period, I saw Samantha sitting with her usual group of friends. They were laughing, talking, pretending everything was normal. But she wasn't really in the conversation. She kept glancing over at me, her eyes flickering with a mix of anger, fear, and something I almost pitied. I wondered if she realized just how carefully I had timed my revelation. How I had used the perfect setting, the perfect audience, the perfect moment to plant the seeds. She had underestimated me, just like she always did. And now, she was learning that her own cruelty had consequences. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. This was about power regained. The kind of power that comes from knowing your own worth and letting others' lies unravel naturally. Samantha's reputation, built on manipulation and lies, was starting to crack. I could see the fear in her eyes when someone mentioned her sisters in passing, or when a teacher casually brought up her boyfriend's past issues. It was subtle, but it was happening. I spent a lot of time reflecting during those days. I realized that for years, my anger had consumed me, but it had also been a guide. It had told me I deserved better, that I wasn't the problem, and that someday I would have my voice. Speaking out in that dance class wasn't about hurting Samantha. It was about freeing myself. And in doing so, I had created a ripple effect that reminded everyone, including her, that actions have consequences. Despite the satisfaction, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, definitely. Empowerment, yes. But also a lingering caution. I knew Samantha could try to retaliate, even in small ways. High school taught me that people like her don't just disappear quietly. They try to manipulate, to twist the narrative back in their favor. But I also knew I wasn't the same person I had been in freshman year. I had strength now, confidence, and a clear understanding of my boundaries. Then one day the unexpected happened. Samantha approached me, not angrily, not confrontationally, but cautiously, almost hesitantly. She spoke in a quiet voice, careful not to draw attention. "Hey, can we talk?" she asked. My first instinct was to shake my head, to walk away. But something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange sense of closure that had been missing for years. We found a quiet spot outside, away from the prying eyes of the school. Samantha didn't look like the confident, untouchable girl I remembered. She looked human, vulnerable, ashamed. She started, then stopped. I waited, arms crossed, heart steady. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. Not now. Not ever. Finally, she sighed. "I didn't think anyone would ever call me out on the way I treated you." There was no apology yet, just acknowledgement. And somehow that was enough. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger boiling in my chest. Instead, I felt calm, powerful, free. The past had finally stopped controlling me. I realized then that revenge, the way I had envisioned it for so long, wasn't really about Samantha at all. It was about reclaiming my own story, asserting my own value, and finally standing tall. I had spoken my truth, and that was all I needed. She would have to live with the consequences of her actions, and I would move forward without carrying the weight of fear or anger anymore. As we parted ways, I felt a strange lightness. The halls didn't feel oppressive. The whispers didn't sting as much. I had planted the seeds, and life had begun its own quiet reckoning. Samantha would have to navigate the fallout of her own making, and I didn't have to lift a finger to ensure it. The satisfaction wasn't in watching her fall. It was in knowing I had already risen. And just like that, I understood something fundamental. True closure doesn't come from revenge. It comes from reclaiming yourself, your voice, your peace. Everything else, rumors, social fallout, the fear of being exposed, was just a ripple effect, a natural consequence. But life, as always, has its own surprises. I had planted the seeds, yes, but the real question lingered in my mind. How would Samantha handle the fallout outside the classroom, when the world beyond her dance career and school hierarchy started noticing the cracks I had helped reveal? That question hung in the air, a suspenseful shadow over my newfound peace. I knew this story wasn't over completely, but for me, the part that mattered most had already been written. It didn't take long for Samantha's careful facade to crumble completely. After my revelation in dance class, whispers and subtle glances turned into quiet confrontations and nervous chatter among the students. Teachers who had been aware of certain behaviors started watching her more closely. The air around her became tense. Every small misstep seemed magnified. People who had once admired her started questioning her integrity. And I, watching from a distance, felt a calm, steady satisfaction unlike anything I had ever known. I didn't participate in the gossip. I didn't add fuel to the fire. I simply let the truth speak for itself. It was strange, almost poetic, to witness how power shifts when honesty replaces lies. Samantha, the girl who had once controlled the narrative and held my confidence hostage, was now struggling under the weight of her own actions. She would smile, make casual jokes, but the nervous energy never left her. I could see it in her hands, her quick glances, the way she hesitated before speaking. Every interaction was a reminder that she could no longer manipulate reality to her favor. The quiet satisfaction I felt came not from seeing her falter, but from the fact that I had taken control of my own story. For years, Samantha's cruelty had defined my school life. It had dictated how I walked, how I spoke, how I perceived myself. But now, I had reclaimed that narrative. I was no longer the shy, fearful freshman. I was someone who had survived, grown stronger, and finally stood tall. One afternoon, a group of students approached me during lunch. They were hesitant, nervous even, but curious. "Hey, we heard about what happened with Samantha," one of them said. Another nodded, adding, "We didn't know the whole story before. We just wanted to say we believe you." It struck me in a way I hadn't anticipated. For so long, I had worried about proving myself, about defending my reputation. And now, here were my peers, offering validation without my even asking. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making Samantha feel small. It was about being seen, being acknowledged, and reclaiming a sense of self that had been stolen from me. Samantha, of course, noticed. I could see her from across the cafeteria, her expression tight, her movements careful. She tried to approach her usual friends, but the dynamic had shifted. Her words, once sharp and biting, now felt hollow. People had started to see through her act. She was learning, perhaps too late, that cruelty carries consequences. I felt a strange sense of empathy for her in that moment. Not pity exactly, but understanding. High school had twisted her in ways I could not fully know. I had experienced my own struggles with anxiety and self-worth, and I could see how her insecurities had fueled her actions. But that didn't excuse the damage she had caused me. It simply meant that her journey would now unfold with the truths of her actions in the spotlight. The culmination of this experience was not dramatic or explosive. There were no shouting matches or public confrontations. Life, as it often does, moved in subtle currents. Samantha's relationships with some peers shifted. Teachers became more vigilant. And I moved forward, carrying with me a renewed sense of confidence and peace. I had spoken my truth once, and it had echoed in ways that did not require further effort. As weeks passed, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The shy, anxious girl who had felt trapped by lies and cruelty had transformed into someone who could face challenges head-on. I realized that revenge, in the traditional sense, was never my goal. My goal had been closure, empowerment, and reclaiming the control that had been stolen from me. And in that, I had succeeded completely. There were moments when Samantha would glance at me, her expression a mix of regret and realization. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The impact of my words, the subtle but undeniable shift in perception, was enough. She had learned the consequences of her actions, and I had reclaimed my life. That, in itself, was the most satisfying form of justice. The final lesson I carried from this experience was profound. Power is not about hurting others, nor is it about revenge for its own sake. True power lies in reclaiming your voice, your story, and your peace. Once you achieve that, the world responds in ways that no amount of scheming or planning can replicate. Samantha's downfall, subtle as it was, became a reflection of the integrity I had gained. And that integrity was something no one could take away. Walking through the school corridors now, I held my head high. I was no longer haunted by past cruelty. I was confident, resilient, and free from the chains of fear and anxiety that had once defined me. I had faced my past, confronted my bully with truth, and emerged stronger. The anger that had once consumed me was gone, replaced with a quiet, powerful sense of self. Looking ahead to college, to new experiences and new beginnings, I felt ready. I knew that life would present challenges, but I also knew that I had the tools to face them. My story was mine to control. My peace was mine to maintain. And Samantha, like all those who underestimate others, would have to navigate the consequences of her actions without my interference. In the end, the revenge I had sought was never about humiliation or pain. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, my confidence, my voice, my sense of self-worth. And now, having done that, I could finally step forward unburdened and empowered. As I walked out of school that day, sunlight catching the edges of the hallways, I felt a lightness I had never known before. The past had been faced. The truth had been spoken. And I was free. Free from fear, free from anger, and ready to embrace everything the future held. If I were in this situation, here's what I would have done. I would have chosen truth over lies, empowerment over cruelty, and closure over vengeance. Because in the end, the most satisfying revenge is living well, standing tall, and never letting anyone steal your peace again. And with that, my story of high school cruelty, quiet revenge, and ultimate closure comes to an end. Samantha's actions have their consequences. My peace is intact. And as I step into the next chapter of my life, I do so with strength, clarity, and freedom. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.